The sun was beginning its slow descent over Boston's suburban skyline, painting the tree-lined streets in hues of gold and amber. The neighborhood was quiet, the kind of place where life moved in measured, predictable rhythms. It was in this serene setting that Cassandra Cass Hayes had built her carefully crafted world. Her home, a modest but impeccably kept colonial-style house, mirrored the life she had cultivated, structured, deliberate, and entirely under her control. Cass adjusted the cuffs of her cream blouse and surveyed the stack of student essays on her dining table. A professor of literature at one of Boston's most esteemed universities, she was renowned for her discipline and her almost preternatural calm. Her students revered her intellect but often described her as distant, untouchable, a reputation Cass neither encouraged nor cared to dispel. She glanced at the time and frowned. In an hour she would need to head to the university to oversee the opening day of the annual Cybersecurity and Digital Crime Symposium. She had been on the organizing committee for months, meticulously planning every detail of the event. It was exhausting, but the predictable nature of such work comforted her. Cass had once lived a very different life. Years earlier she had been married to a man who had chipped away at her self-worth with every critical remark. He had belittled her aspirations, dismissed her passions, and eventually betrayed her. The divorce had been a painful unraveling of dreams she had once cherished. Now she lived by a single ironclad rule: never allow love to disrupt her life again. 200 miles away in the heart of New York City, Jade Ramirez leaned against the hood of her car, finishing a lukewarm coffee from a corner deli. Jade thrived in the chaos of the city, her work as a private investigator feeding off its frenetic energy. With her cropped leather jacket, tousled hair, and sharp wit, she moved through life with a confidence born of experience, and the knowledge that she didn't owe anyone her vulnerability. She had learned the hard way that trust was a dangerous thing. Years ago she had given it freely, only to have it shattered by a woman she had loved. The betrayal left scars that Jade hid behind sarcasm and charm, using her work to distract her from the loneliness she refused to acknowledge. Cybersecurity Symposium, huh? She muttered to herself, rereading the email on her phone. She had been invited to speak about her experience tracking digital fraud and cybercrimes. Public speaking wasn't her favorite part of the job, but the university's hefty fee had convinced her to accept. Grinning to herself, Jade tossed the coffee cup into a nearby trash can and slid into the driver's seat. She had no idea her next case would take her somewhere far more personal than any investigation. Cass's heels clicked against the polished floors of the university's conference center as she made her way to the event registration desk. Everything was running smoothly, just as she had planned. Guests were mingling, the catering team was on schedule, and the keynote speaker was set to arrive soon. She had just finished answering a question from a volunteer when a ripple of energy swept through the room. Cass turned to see what had caused the commotion and immediately spotted her. Jade Ramirez was walking toward the podium with the kind of presence that demanded attention. Dressed in a black button-up shirt and fitted jeans, Jade's appearance was strikingly casual compared to the formality of the event. Her leather jacket was slung over her shoulder, and her dark eyes scanned the room as if daring anyone to challenge her. Cass stiffened. This was not what she had envisioned for the symposium's centerpiece speaker. Jade took the stage with a self-assured smile, her voice resonating through the room as she began her talk. She opened with a story about a recent case, a corporate espionage scandal involving encrypted emails and a disgruntled ex-employee. Her delivery was sharp, her tone conversational, and the audience was captivated. Cass, however, found herself bristling at Jade's irreverent style. She prided herself on professionalism, and Jade seemed to delight in breaking every rule of decorum. After the talk, Cass retreated to the refreshment table, pouring herself a cup of black coffee. She was mid-sip when a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Professor Hayes, right?" Cass turned to see Jade standing beside her, an easy grin on her face. "Yes," Cass replied, her tone polite but clipped. "And you are?" "Jade Ramirez," she said, offering a hand. "I figured I should introduce myself, since we're both part of this event." Cass hesitated before shaking Jade's hand. "Your presentation was engaging." "Engaging," Jade echoed, her grin widening. "I'll take that as a compliment." Cass set her cup down, folding her hands neatly in front of her. "You have an unconventional approach." "And you have a very conventional one," Jade countered, her voice tinged with amusement. I guess that makes us even. Cass blinked, unaccustomed to being spoken to with such casual boldness. I appreciate clarity and order. And I appreciate shaking things up, Jade said, her dark eyes twinkling with mischief. The exchange left Cass flustered in a way she hadn't been in years. She quickly excused herself, retreating to the safety of her carefully constructed world. But as the evening wore on, she found her gaze drifting toward Jade more than once. Jade, for her part, noticed Cass's guarded demeanor and saw it as a challenge. She enjoyed peeling back layers, and Cass was a puzzle she couldn't resist. As the conference wrapped up, the two women crossed paths again, this time near the exit. Leaving so soon? Jade asked, leaning casually against the doorframe. Some of us have work to do, Cass replied, her tone brisk. Jade chuckled. Well, it was nice meeting you, Professor. Maybe I'll see you around. Cass didn't respond, but as she walked away, she couldn't shake the feeling that Jade had left more than a passing impression. That night, as Cass sat in her study grading essays, her mind kept wandering back to Jade's easy smile and sharp wit. She tried to push the thoughts away, telling herself it was nothing. But deep down she knew the encounter had stirred something she hadn't felt in years. In New York, Jade poured herself a drink and stared out at the city lights. She thought of the tightly wound professor with the piercing gaze and wondered why Cass Hayes was still on her mind. Neither of them knew it yet, but their worlds were about to collide in ways that would challenge everything they thought they knew about themselves, and about love. The conference had ended 3 days ago, and Cassandra Hayes was grateful for the return to her predictable routine. The event had gone off without a hitch, save for the lingering memory of one Jade Ramirez, whose confident smirk and sharp wit had proven far more distracting than Cass cared to admit. She had told herself it was irrelevant. The keynote speaker was a passing anomaly in her otherwise orderly world. But destiny as always had other plans. It was late afternoon when the head librarian at the university burst into Cass's office, visibly flustered. Dr. Hayes, she said, clutching a folder of papers to her chest, there's been a theft. Cass looked up from her desk, her brow furrowing. A theft? In the library? Yes, the librarian replied, sinking into the chair opposite Cass. Several documents from the Special Collections Archive are missing. Manuscripts, letters, some of them irreplaceable. Cass felt a knot of concern tighten in her chest. The Special Collections housed rare pieces of history, some of which had been curated with her input. Do you have any leads? Not yet, the librarian admitted. Campus security reviewed the footage, but it's inconclusive. A colleague recommended we bring in an external investigator. Someone experienced with cases like this. Cass hesitated. Who do they suggest? The librarian handed her a business card. Cass stared at the name printed in bold letters. Jade Ramirez, private investigator. Jade's phone buzzed on the desk of her cluttered New York apartment. She glanced at the number, one eyebrow quirking in surprise. It was a Boston area code. Ramirez, she answered, leaning back in her chair. Ms. Ramirez, this is Cassandra Hayes, came the voice on the other end. The formality and precision were unmistakable, and Jade couldn't help the grin that spread across her face. Professor Hayes, she said smoothly, to what do I owe the pleasure? There's been a theft at the university, Cass explained, her tone clipped. You come highly recommended. Are you available to take the case? Jade let the silence linger just long enough to make Cass uncomfortable before replying, I suppose I could make the trip. I'll need the details when I arrive. Cass gave her the necessary information, then ended the call abruptly. Jade chuckled to herself, already looking forward to the reunion. Jade arrived at the university the next morning, her presence as disruptive as ever. Dressed in a leather jacket and combat boots, she sauntered into Cass's office, her confident smirk firmly in place. Good to see you again, Professor, Jade said, leaning casually against the doorframe. Cass stood from her desk, her posture rigid. Thank you for coming, Ms. Ramirez. Jade, she corrected, her eyes sparkling with amusement. Cass didn't respond, instead motioning for her to follow. I'll take you to the library. The tension between them was palpable as they walked through the campus. Jade, ever observant, couldn't resist teasing Cass. So did you miss me? She asked, her tone light. Cass shot her a withering look. This is a professional matter, Ms. Ramirez. Jade, she repeated with a grin. And relax, Professor. I'm here to help, not cause trouble. Somehow I doubt that, Cass muttered under her breath, earning a soft laugh from Jade. The investigation began in earnest, with Jade reviewing security footage and examining the crime scene. She worked with a precision that surprised Cass, her playful demeanor giving way to sharp focus when the situation demanded it. Despite her reservations, Cass found herself admiring Jade's skill. She was resourceful, determined, and, though Cass hated to admit it, charming in her own disarming way. One evening as they pored over files in Cass's office, Jade leaned back in her chair, studying the professor. "You're full of surprises, you know that?" Jade said. Cass looked up from her notes, frowning. "I don't know what you mean." "You're not as unshakable as you want people to think," Jade replied, her gaze steady. Cass bristled. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Sure you don't," Jade said, her voice tinged with amusement but also something softer, concern. "You've got this sadness in your eyes like you're carrying something heavy. You don't have to tell me what it is, but it's there." Cass froze, the words striking closer to home than she cared to admit. She quickly returned her attention to the files, refusing to let Jade see the cracks in her armor. But Jade had seen enough. Later that night, while investigating a restricted section of the library, Jade reached for a shelf and accidentally knocked over a stack of heavy books. One corner of a particularly sharp volume caught her hand, leaving a thin but painful cut across her palm. "Damn it," she muttered, pressing her hand against her shirt to stop the bleeding. Cass rushed over, her concern breaking through her usual composure. "Let me see," she demanded. "It's fine, Professor," Jade began, but Cass silenced her with a glare. She guided Jade to a nearby desk, pulling a first aid kit from a drawer. Her hands trembled slightly as she cleaned the wound, her fingers brushing against Jade's skin. "Hold still," Cass murmured, her voice unusually soft. Jade watched her, the usual teasing smile replaced by something more serious. "You're good at this," she said quietly. Cass didn't respond, but her cheeks flushed as she wrapped Jade's hand in gauze. The air between them grew heavier, their proximity magnifying the tension that had been building for days. Jade's eyes lingered on Cass's face, her gaze tracing the line of her jaw, the curve of her lips. "Cass," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. But before either could act on the moment, the shrill sound of an alarm pierced the silence. Cass jolted upright, her hands pulling away from Jade's as they both turned toward the noise. "It's the campus security alarm," Cass said, standing quickly. "We should check it out." Jade nodded, flexing her bandaged hand. "Yeah. Let's go." They didn't speak of the moment again, but it lingered between them like an unspoken promise. In the days that followed, their conversations were laced with subtext, their glances holding for just a second too long. Both women were experts at building walls, but those walls were beginning to crumble. The investigation into the library theft was proving to be more complicated than either Cassandra Hayes or Jade Ramirez had anticipated. Days turned into weeks as they followed leads, combed through records and interviewed staff and students. Yet with every passing day, something else began to unfold between them, a connection neither had expected, nor felt prepared to confront. Cass found herself drawn to Jade's confidence and determination. Despite the private investigator's carefree exterior, Jade's dedication to her work was unwavering. Cass noticed the subtle ways Jade would take charge during tense moments, her ability to read people with uncanny precision. Jade in turn was captivated by Cass's quiet strength. Beneath her composed exterior, Jade could see glimpses of vulnerability, a softening in her expression when she thought no one was looking, or the way her voice wavered ever so slightly when discussing something she cared deeply about. It made Jade want to know more, to understand the woman who had so carefully guarded herself from the world. One evening they found themselves in Cass's office after hours, poring over surveillance footage for the 100th time. Outside, the wind howled and the occasional flicker of lightning illuminated the window panes. "I don't understand how we've come this far with so little to show for it," Cass muttered, leaning back in her chair and rubbing her temples. Jade looked up from her laptop, smirking. "Welcome to my world. Investigations aren't as glamorous as TV makes them out to be." Cass gave her a tired smile. "I can't imagine you letting a dead end stop you." "Never," Jade replied with mock seriousness. "I'm too stubborn for that." The comment drew a soft laugh from Cass, and for a moment the tension in the room eased. Jade stood and stretched, her shirt lifting slightly to reveal a sliver of skin. Cass averted her gaze, feeling a warmth creep into her cheeks. Hungry? Jade asked, glancing at the clock. It's getting late. Cass hesitated. I think I have some leftover takeout in the faculty fridge. Perfect, Jade said, already heading for the door. I'll grab it. You find us something to drink. Minutes later, they were seated on the couch in Cass's office. A mismatched meal of reheated dumplings and bottled water spread out between them. The office, usually a place of formality and professionalism, felt oddly intimate in the glow of the desk lamp. Jade picked up a dumpling with her chopsticks, pausing before taking a bite. You ever wonder how you got here? Cass tilted her head. Here as in this office? Here as in this version of yourself, Jade clarified, her tone unusually serious. Cass set down her chopsticks, her posture stiffening slightly. I'm not sure I understand the question. Jade leaned back, her expression thoughtful. I mean, I know why I am the way I am. Why I don't trust people, why I keep things casual. It's because I got burned bad. Cass looked at her, sensing there was more to the story. What happened? Jade hesitated, then let out a long sigh. There was someone. We were together for a few years. I thought it was real, like the kind of real you don't question. Then one day I found out she was lying about everything. She'd been using me, manipulating me. After that, I decided I wasn't going to give anyone that kind of power over me again. Cass listened in silence, her chest tightening. That sounds devastating. It was, Jade admitted, her voice soft. But it taught me a lesson. You can't rely on anyone but yourself. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Jade turned the question back on Cass. What about you? What made you build these walls around yourself? Cass's eyes dropped to the floor, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. My ex-husband, she said quietly. He had a way of making me feel small. My dreams were never good enough for him. I wasn't good enough for him. By the time he left, I barely recognized myself. Jade leaned forward, her gaze steady. You know that's not true, right? You're more than good enough, Cass. Cass's breath caught at the sincerity in Jade's voice. For a moment she felt something she hadn't in years. Seen, understood. The atmosphere shifted, the air around them charged with unspoken emotion. Jade reached out, brushing her fingers against Cass's. The touch was light, hesitant, but it sent a shiver down Cass's spine. I think Jade began, but the words were lost as Cass leaned in, her lips capturing Jade's in a sudden, desperate kiss. The kiss was electric, a culmination of weeks of tension and suppressed feelings. Jade responded immediately, her hand moving to cup Cass's face. It was messy and uncoordinated but filled with raw emotion. But just as quickly as it began, Cass pulled away, her eyes wide with panic. She stammered, standing abruptly. I can't. Jade, still seated, looked up at her with a mixture of understanding and hurt. It's okay, she said softly, even though her voice cracked. Take your time. Cass nodded, unable to meet Jade's gaze, and left the room. The days that followed were marked by an almost unbearable tension. They continued to work together, but their conversations were clipped, their interactions laced with unspoken words. For Jade, the kiss had only confirmed what she had been afraid to admit. She wanted more than she had ever allowed herself to want. For Cass, it had cracked open something she thought she had buried forever. As the investigation neared its conclusion, the case seemed to be the least of their challenges. The real question was whether they could face the truths they had been avoiding and take a leap neither had dared to consider before. The resolution of the library theft case unfolded in a way neither Cassandra Hayes nor Jade Ramirez could have anticipated. After weeks of painstaking investigation, the culprit turned out to be a graduate assistant who had fallen into debt and saw the rare manuscripts as an easy way to make quick money. The evidence Jade collected, a series of digital breadcrumbs leading to an encrypted chat history, was undeniable. Caught red-handed, Jade said with a triumphant smirk as she handed over the final report to campus security. Cass stood beside her, a mixture of relief and melancholy washing over her. The case's conclusion meant that Jade's presence in her life, which had come to feel unsettlingly essential, was no longer necessary. You did excellent work, Cass said, her tone formal but her eyes betraying her emotions. Jade tilted her head, studying Cass for a long moment. Thanks. It's what I do. The words were casual, but there was a weight behind them. Jade reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small folded piece of paper, pressing it into Cass's hand. What's this? Cass asked, her brow furrowing. Just something to think about, Jade said, her voice soft but steady. Without another word, she turned and walked away, leaving Cass standing in the corridor, the note clutched in her hand. Later that evening, alone in her study, Cass unfolded the paper. The handwriting was bold and slanted, much like its author. Some promises are worth breaking. Cass stared at the words for a long time, her heart pounding. Days turned into weeks, but the note never left Cass's desk. She picked it up occasionally, running her fingers over the ink as if it might somehow reveal more than it already had. Jade had left, and life at the university resumed its predictable rhythm. Yet for Cass, everything felt off-kilter. She replayed their moments together, the glint in Jade's eyes when she teased her, the way her voice softened when she shared pieces of her past. Her hesitation gnawed at her. She had built her life on control, on keeping her heart safe behind walls so high no one could scale them. But now she wondered if those walls were keeping her from something worth risking everything for. It was a crisp afternoon when fate intervened. Cass had just left her office for a rare coffee break at a small cafe near campus. She was halfway through her order when a familiar voice cut through the hum of the cafe. 2 sugars, no cream. Cass turned sharply, her breath catching as she saw Jade standing a few feet away, hands casually tucked into the pockets of her leather jacket. "What are you doing here?" Cass asked, her voice more surprised than accusatory. Jade shrugged, but there was an undercurrent of vulnerability in her tone. "Had to come back to Boston to testify for the case. Thought I'd grab a coffee. Didn't expect to run into you." Cass doubted that entirely, but she didn't press. They found a table near the window, and the air between them buzzed with unspoken words. "You look well," Jade said, her voice softer now. "So do you," Cass replied, her hands fidgeting with the edge of her sleeve. Jade leaned forward, her dark eyes searching Cass's face. "Have you thought about it?" "The note." Cass swallowed hard. She had thought about little else. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do what?" Jade asked gently. "This," Cass said, gesturing between them. "Feel something I can't control. Let myself want this." Jade reached across the table, her hand resting over Cass's. "You don't have to figure it all out at once. Just don't shut it out." Cass looked down at their joined hands, then back up at Jade, her resolve crumbling. "I never wanted to break my own rules," she said, her voice trembling. "But you make it feel like the only right choice." Jade's eyes widened slightly, then softened with a mixture of relief and joy. "Maybe that's because some rules were made to be broken, together." The words hung between them, fragile but full of promise. Cass exhaled, a weight lifting from her chest as she gave a small, genuine smile. In the weeks that followed, Cass and Jade began to explore what together looked like. It wasn't easy. Cass still struggled with letting go of control, and Jade often wrestled with her instinct to keep things light. But they learned from each other. Cass found joy in Jade's spontaneity, while Jade discovered comfort in Cass's steady presence. Their differences became a source of strength rather than conflict. One evening, as they sat on Cass's porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Jade reached for Cass's hand. "Do you ever think about where this might go?" Jade asked, her voice tentative. "All the time," Cass admitted, her gaze steady. "But for once, I'm not afraid of not knowing." Jade smiled, pressing a kiss to Cass's knuckles. "Good. Because I think this could be something worth fighting for." Cass leaned into her, their foreheads touching as the world around them seemed to fade. For the first time in years, both women felt like they were exactly where they were meant to be. Whatever the future held, they knew one thing: together they could face it.